And if they steal 2028, or for some reason we don't prevail, which will be them stealing it, they're going to put Trump back on trial for prison. They're going to put me back in prison. Every day I said, hey, this thing's all or nothing. Just because we had this tremendous victory in November, I told every time they're all partying and, oh, this is great. And everybody's running around, got a MAGA hat now. And I said, hey, that's fine. But understand we're at war.
Will Trump's Tariff Liberation Day harm the US economy? Is Elon Musk leaving the administration? And is the president deporting enough illegal immigrants? My name is Stephen Edgington, and I'm GB News' US correspondent. Joining me to answer those questions and many more is the former White House chief strategist, Stephen K. Bannon. Thank you so much, Steve, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We just had Liberation Day, but many Americans are concerned that prices are going to go up and
Americans,
tariffs...
okay, stop. This is just the only reason people have any concern at all is because the running dog for the capitalists on Wall Street and the lords of easy money media continues to go on with this false narrative that prices are going to go up, stock market is going to crash, everything's going to happen over and over and over again without looking at any evidence. We put some of the strictest tariffs ever on China in 17 and 18, and prices didn't go up at all on Chinese product. This is just another false narrative put out by the media. It's the same as all the lies they told about the pandemic, all the lies they told about the Ukraine, all the lies they told about the Seoul election. I could go on and on and on. The only people worked up about, did the market crash today? No, did not. You have a sorting out of things. I didn't say there was not going to be any turbulence. Didn't have any crash, didn't have gold blow through the roof. Nothing that was prophesized yesterday. And look, Trump went hard. And it shows you, I think, to the world, he's not a maximalist. I was always for the reciprocity, but the reciprocity has a maximalist side where you just go and match whatever your analysis shows. He was also thinking there was tension around with President Trump to just do tiered at 20%. He did do reciprocity, which I thought was very important to show the American people how people have abused the United States of America and American companies. And just this narrative that's out there by the vested interests in this country who don't want to see the end of the globalist system. The globalists are sitting here in panic mode because now Trump has gone large and he's not going to back off. If you notice today, I thought was very important. There was a lot of commentary out there, including his Secretary of Commerce and even me saying, hey, you know, Trump will be negotiating between now and the end of his current term before his third term. And he put out the word, no negotiations. They are what they are. So I think you show as he stepped into this decision. This is core Trump. This is something he's been thinking about for 40 years, but really thinking deeply about with his advisors since the election was stolen, went to Mar-a-Lago. But so, and I think this narrative just on and on and on, particularly by people on the left who want to be populist or understand that the reason that they lost is that the Democrats abandoned the working class in this country and they won't support them or vote for them anymore. You would think that they would try to at least understand the populist economic nationalist policy in bringing massive amount of capital investment in plant and equipment here and bringing plants and bringing high value added jobs back.
But that's the key point, isn't it? And isn't it more honest to say, look, we know that this is going to have an impact on
And if they steal 2028, or for some reason we don't prevail, which will be them stealing it, they're going to put Trump back on trial for prison. They're going to put me back in prison. Every day I said, hey, this thing's all or nothing. Just because we had this tremendous victory in November, I told everybody at the time, they're all partying, and oh, this is great, and everybody's running around, got a MAGA hat now, and I said, hey, that's fine, but understand we're at war.
Will Trump's Tariff Liberation Day harm the US economy? Is Elon Musk leaving the administration? And is the president deporting enough illegal immigrants? My name is Stephen Edgington, and I'm GB News' US correspondent. Answer those questions and many more is the former White House chief strategist, Stephen K. Bannon. Thank you so much, Steve, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We just had Liberation Day, but many Americans are concerned that prices are going to go up and
Americans,
tariffs...
okay, stop. This is just the only reason people have any concern at all is because the running dog for the capitalists on Wall Street and the lords of easy money, media, continues to go on with this false narrative that prices are going to go up, stock market is going to crash, everything's going to happen over and over and over again without looking at any evidence. We put some of the strictest tariffs ever on China in 17 and 18, and prices didn't go up at all on Chinese product. This is just another false narrative put out by the media. It's the same as all the lies they told about the pandemic, all the lies they told about the Ukraine, all the lies they told about the Seoul election. I could go on and on and on. The only people worked up about, did the market crash today? No, did not. You have a sorting out of things. I didn't say there was not going to be any turbulence. Didn't have any crash, didn't have gold blow through the roof. Nothing that was prophesized yesterday. And look, Trump went hard. And it shows you, I think, to the world, he's not a maximalist. I was always for the reciprocity, but the reciprocity has a maximalist side where you just go and match whatever your analysis shows. He was also thinking there was tension around with President Trump to just do tiered at 20%. He did do reciprocity, which I thought was very important to show the American people how people have abused the United States of America and American companies. And just this narrative that's out there by the vested interests in this country who don't want to see the end of the globalist system. The globalists are sitting here in panic mode because now Trump has gone large and he's not going to back off. If you notice today, I thought was very important. There was a lot of commentary out there, including his Secretary of Commerce and even me saying, hey, you know, Trump will be negotiating between now and the end of his current term before his third term. And he put out the word, no negotiations. They are what they are. So I think you show as he stepped into this decision. This is core Trump. This is something he's been thinking about for 40 years, but really thinking deeply about with his advisors since the election was stolen, went to Mar-a-Lago. But so, and I think this narrative just on and on and on, particularly by people on the left who want to be populist or understand that the reason that they lost is that the Democrats abandoned the working class in this country and they won't support them or vote for them anymore. You would think that they would try to at least understand the populist economic nationalist policy in bringing massive amount of capital investment in plant and equipment here and bringing plants and bringing high value added jobs back.
But that's the key point, isn't it? And isn't it more honest to say, look, we know that this is going to have an impact on prices. If you put at least a 10%, in some cases much higher, there's going to be an impact on the price.
It doesn't mean the increased costs flow to the consumer. Let me repeat this. You can add everybody combined, and we don't buy as much as we buy from China. I think it's the net trade deficit with China is $500 or $600 billion. We are essentially to the Chinese what the colonies of America used to be to Great Britain during the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. We're just shipping raw materials. We send very little finished product because they've gutted all our factories and sent them to China. So in buying that $500 billion and $600 billion is actually more because that's the net deficit. In buying that amount of finished product from China, prices didn't go up in 18 and 19. They just didn't. In Christmas of 19, we had virtually no inflation, lowest interest rates we've ever had, exploding growth, 3.5% growth. We had blue collar wages rising faster than white collar. We had non-college graduates raising higher than college graduates. That's kind of the economic nationalist model of Trump, and we're restricting immigration at the time. Since that time, Biden's exploded, invited in 10 million illegal alien invaders to drive down wage cost among unskilled workers. But there's no evidence when Trump did this the first time, not a scintilla evidence from the largest partner we buy from on finished goods that there was any price increase. There was no price increase we could see when we put the steel tariffs in. So they try to use this to scare people. The two reasons for tariffs is, number one, and I think for people in Great Britain to understand, is that this is a premium market. The United States is a premium market. So what President Trump, he thinks about, he says, hey, it's like buying a skybox at a sporting event or front row tickets to a concert. To get into this market, you're going to have to pay a premium, okay, to get access to the biggest consumer, the deepest consumer market in the world. There's two ways to do that. You either stay outside and manufacture your finished products, and you're going to pay a tolling fee to get in here. I think the reciprocal tariffs are in Great Britain, I think it was 10%, if memory serves me correctly. Or you have an option. You have an option to come and move your manufacturing to the United States. I think he'd rather have the manufacturing come to the United States. But if not, we have an external revenue service now that Peter Navarro says in the auto tariffs alone will bring in $100 billion. Remember, just think about this for a second. We sell essentially $800 billion of cars in the United States a year, okay? Of that, only 500 billion of that are made overseas, Germany, Japan, etc. Even of the 350 or 300 billion that are manufactured here, they're really not manufactured, they're assembled. We take still the high value added finished goods, the drive train, the engine from either Mexico, Germany, or in Mexico, we're making it for the Germans. So, or the Japanese. That all has to stop. We have to bring, and this is about bringing high value added manufacturing jobs to the United States. And certainly it's going to cause a little turbulence. I mean, we essentially, I think, went to economic war with the Chinese Communist Party yesterday. Those are particularly where Xi is on his economic revival, which they're in very bad straits. These tariffs, I think, could put Xi out of business. So it's both geoeconomic and resetting the post-war international rules-based order, but it's also geostrategic.
Lots of companies tried to outsource their manufacturing away from China and into other Southeast Asian countries like Vietnam.
Cambodia.
Right.
Cambodia had a bad day yesterday.
Exactly. So is putting 50% tariffs on countries like Vietnam strategically a smart thing to do when you're trying to decouple from China, when you're trying to encourage people to stop building in China?
Well, and decoupling with China, we want to bring those jobs back to the United States. Yes, there's still going to be product made in Cambodia and these other places, but why? It's just reciprocal. Remember, President Trump's adamant. If you bring the tariffs down, and particularly on reciprocity, you bring the non-tariff barriers, which is really where the juice is. You bring that down, we'll let bygones be bygones.
Right, but it's not reciprocal though, because the data that they're relying on is the trade deficit. They're not actually talking about specific tariffs those countries have implemented or non-tariff barriers. They've made that calculation, and the White House have said this, they've admitted this, based on the trade deficit in goods with the United States. So how is that reciprocal?
What's reciprocal to that country? You've got to work with us to decrease
the deficit, but not to the.
But you have to do what you have to do to work and make sure that we somehow take care of that deficit. The accumulate, because everybody talks about our debt here, the $37 trillion in debt. We're going to have, I think, the Biden, last year is going to be, I think, near $1 trillion trade deficit. We have a cumulative trade deficit, I believe, of $25 trillion. They're kind of inextricably linked with debt, but the globalists never want to talk about trade deficit. They say, oh, it doesn't really matter. It matters tremendously. That was the wages of United States workers going overseas to pay something, or it's the monetization of certain assets we have to pay for it. So no, I think each country in its own way will work out some sort of individual deal. President Trump said he's open. Right now he says no negotiations, because I think he wants a time for them to kind of realize that he's serious about this. And he is serious about this. His primary focus is the economic rejuvenation of the United States. And I think that's very powerful. And for the American people, it's been an eye-opener. Because remember, one of the reasons we're $37 trillion in debt is we have a $1 trillion defense bill. Why do we have a $1 trillion defense bill? Well, we're underwriting the security of Western Europe, of the Persian Gulf and the Gulf Emirates, of around the South China Sea and the Straits of Malacca, and then up to Northwest Asia with Japan and Korea. That has to stop. We're upside down. We have trade deficits basically with every part of the. You go around the horn, around the rim of the Eurasian landmass. We have trade deficits everywhere. We can't continue. He's trying to bring down the financial deficit. At the same time, he's trying to bring down the trade deficit. And this is the first time in our history, even with Reagan, that any president has stepped up and said, my first priority is American workers. And I'm going to show you how it's going to happen, because I'm basically going to lay out a new economic model for the world. And the world can think about it, adjust to it, and then come to us. I'm sure they'll have open discussions.
Right. You mentioned Ronald Reagan. I'm going to quote from Reagan. This was when he was president. He was massively against the tariffs that occurred in the early 1930s during the Great Depression. He said, "You see, at first, when someone says, let's impose tariffs on foreign imports, it looks like they're doing the patriotic thing by protecting American products and jobs. And sometimes that works for a short while. What eventually occurs is homegrown industries start relying on government protection in the form of high tariffs. They stop competing and making innovative management and technological changes they need to succeed in world markets. And then something even worse happens. High tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation by foreign countries. The result is more tariffs, higher and higher trade barriers, and less competition."
Okay, Thatcher, I don't need to be, okay, I got it. I understand what Reagan said. Reagan and Thatcher were neoliberal neocons, okay? At that time, in trying to take on the Soviet Union, I appreciate that. But also remember, Ronald Reagan was coming in at the beginning of which we had been a manufacturing superpower. And Carter started to, as soon as we started running trade deficits and we stopped protecting American industries from mercantilist systems, this is not, that right there is a fantasy. It's a fantasy that comes out of the kind of the National Review and all the intellectual conservatives like the Tory party that have gotten us into this situation, that gutted England, that gutted the United States because they believed in the system of fair trade when it's not fair. This is a complete mercantilist system, as reciprocity just showed the American people. The American people didn't know that all these tariffs and trade barriers were up against our allies. There were underwriting. This is the whole thing like with Europe. In Europe, it's quite frankly, we've been underwriting your defense since World War II, and we're kind of underwriting your prosperity. That's going to end. We're going to get prosperous here. President Trump is just wrong. The system that worked, that when we broke off of the monopolistic power of the British Crown, and one of the reasons people don't understand this, we broke off not just for political freedom, but also economic freedom. What drove the revolutionary generation as much as the suppression of their first free speech, that we couldn't even do cartoons about the king in pamphlets or we'd be shut down, was also what the crown did in corrupting, the crown and the aristocracy did in corrupting commons and giving monopolistic power to entities like the British East India Company or other industrial combines. That what England had gotten to at that time was kind of how the United States runs today, right? Oligarchic power with state power combined, you have a system. That's what our revolution broke away from. And what happened? A document that's just as dear to us, economic populists and nationalists, as the Declaration of Independence, which was really a declaration of war against the empire, and the Constitution, which tried to get this thing organized later, is the Report on Manufacturers by Alexander Hamilton, who was a true economic nationalist. That's the third founding document of the United States. And what happened from the American plan from the beginning of the from the beginning of the country right after the Revolution all the way up to the early 20th century, and particularly through McKinley, we certainly protected. And some of the biggest protectionists of protection our native industries were not just Alexander Hamilton, but a guy named Abraham Lincoln, right? And then McKinley, they understood. And this is what drove us. Although the Industrial Revolution started in England, we rapidly became an industrial superpower. Why? Because of a smart system of tariffs. The free trade is a masturbatory fantasy. It doesn't exist in the real world. They're gaming the system. And the Chinese Communist Party, which quite frankly, Thatcher and Reagan set the basis for the opening up of both and the shipping. They didn't do it. That was Bush and the globalists later. But to ship all the high value added jobs from England and the United States to ship it to China so they could leverage the slave labor of Lao Beijing. So these people have been called out. The thing I love so much about reciprocity in this, Of all the original ideas President Trump has, and then build the wall and deportations, all that, which, by the way, everything he told us he would do, he's done. And now the southern border is totally secure 65 days into his presidency, which just shows you how corrupt the imperial capital of Washington, D.C. with this huge bill. But President Trump, the idea that's burned in him from the beginning, from the 1980s and 90s, go back and look at the interviews, is Lou Dobbs on CNN talking about the trade deficit, talking about the time Japan, but ultimately China, ripping off the United States and all of our jobs. This has been an obsession of his from the beginning. And yesterday, I couldn't have been prouder. For your audience that hasn't seen it, take time and watch the entire speech. It is one of the 2, 3, or 4 most powerful speeches Trump's ever given. Totally on point. The stagecraft was perfect. They took the Rose Garden, which is right outside the Oval Office, and they put the flags up in between each column. It was so powerful. And the message was on point. It was said with authority. And then inspired, he brought up union workers. He brought up union workers to actually talk about how much they loved it and how much this was going to help rejuvenate the automotive industry.
You talk about declaring economic war on the Chinese Communist Party,
Yeah.
but these
think
tariffs also impacted, or perhaps even declared economic war on your own allies, the European Union, Britain,
Who are the
Canada.
Give me the allies again.
European
Who are the allies?
Union,
Here's what
Canada,
I consider.
Australia.
I am so insulted by you using the term allies. Allies supposed to be somebody in something together. The European elites are total and complete deadbeats. I was the guy on point in the first administration. I had to be a supplicant to ask you guys, would you please consider getting up to the 2 and 2.5% that you committed after you forced your way into Ukraine in 2014? You realized you were going to have a fight on your hands. You actually realized we have to get to 2% or 2.5%, which none of you did. Only the Brits came close and later the Poles. And if you look at really, and particularly the Germans, the Italians, some of these people are horrible. The French, if you actually look at where the defense budget goes, it's not going to combined arms operation. It's not going to maneuvers. It's not going
pensions.
It would go into pensions or women's health care or climate change. Climate change is the big one. It's all phony. It's all fake. You haven't been an ally forever. You can't pull your weight. If you took the United States out of Western Europe today militarily, the whole thing would collapse. We're the infrastructure and the backbone of everything. It's completely unacceptable. This is why they praise Joe Biden. If you read the new books coming out about Joe Biden, own chiefs of staff, they had to tell him, hey, you're not the president of NATO. Because he kept sitting there babbling, well, the NATO guys really love me. They love me. Of course, you're giving them everything. The Western European people must understand that their elites have not been allies to the United States. You've looked at the burden of everything, of manpower, right? Of defense. Right now, you call yourself an ally? In the Red Sea right now, we have 2 carrier battle groups. That's about 24,000 sailors doing airstrikes on the Houthis to keep the Red Sea open, to keep the Suez Canal open, to keep trade going to Europe so your prices don't explode. And you know what we have down there? Last I saw, you have, I think, 1 British destroyer, 1 French frigate, 1 Italian corvette. You don't even take seriously your own thing. So how can we take you seriously? You're not allies. You don't act like allies. What you do is you bitch and you moan when the United States says, hey, look, we just can't do this forever. We have a $1 trillion defense budget and we got to cut the defense budget. We're going to cut spending because we have a $2 trillion deficit every year. People should understand the signal that President Trump is sending every day about Greenland is about the defense of Europe. To wit, the Russian army's your problem. The Russian Navy's our problem. We get some sort of partnership or alliance or something with Greenland. Maybe even they become a territory, whatever that form is. We get those naval bases that President Trump, I believe, wants to set up, and we block the Greenland, Iceland, UK gap so no Soviet submarines cannot come through there that we don't track one-on-one. And also, I believe, take the pressure off the nuclear base at Cregan in Scotland, which has always been very controversial about Scottish nationalism. I think that's a necessity. I think that's the core. I don't think it's rare earths, and I don't think it's minerals about Greenland. I think it's strategically. I think it's sending a strong message that in 80 years after World War II, we're now going to think about the hemispheric defense of the United States. This has massive implications for Europe. But the EU, and the EU was the first to start bitching and moaning about the tariffs. They ought to look how these countries treat us. They don't treat us as allies. And they particularly don't treat us as people who have been underwriting their defense for 80 years. Number one, freed them twice, World War I and World War II. And number two, have then basically paid 80% of it ongoing. Let me give you a story. When the Germans came in 2017, of it ongoing. Let me give you a story. When the Germans came in 2017, I was assigned to sit down with the National Security Advisor, and I said, oh, by the way, you're not meeting your 2%. This is how far you're missing. And we had done numbers because President Trump's a real estate guy, back rent. Oh, by the way, you haven't, this was in 2017, you're 4 years arrears. I'm not meaning it. Your number is $50 billion. He almost had a heart attack in the room. He starts spouting. He starts speaking German again. What can you do? This is not cumulative. What are you saying? I'm saying, hey, you want to be an ally? Then he throws up to me. He says, oh, you don't understand. We can't do that. And I go, why? Even make up to me. He says, because we have in the Constitution that it has to be a balanced budget. I go, dude, I know you wrote that part of your Constitution later, but let's be blunt. Till we bombed you into, the Stone Age, there wouldn't have been any Constitution. National Security Advisor. And I said, oh, by the way, you're not meeting your 2%. This is how far you're missing. And we had done numbers because President Trump's a real estate guy, back rent. Oh, by the way, you haven't, this was in 2017, you're 4 years arrears. I'm not meaning it. Your number is $50 billion. He almost had a heart attack in the room. He starts spouting. He starts speaking German again. He says, what can you do? This is not cumulative. What are you saying? I'm saying, hey, you want to be an ally? Then he throws up to me. He says, oh, you don't understand. We can't do that. And I go, why? Even make up to me. He says, because we have in the Constitution that it has to be a balanced budget. I go, dude, I know you wrote that part of your Constitution later, but let's be blunt. Till we bombed you into, the Stone Age, there wouldn't have been any Constitution. You can't pitch to me that a country that has $2 trillion deficit, and at that time, $32 or $33 trillion and face amount of debt that we can't afford to pay off. Please don't come and make the argument that your Constitution is so pristine that you can't have budget deficits. And duly noted, just a week ago, they changed it that they actually can run budget deficit because these deadbeats have not paid for their defense in 80 years. So don't throw ally at me. They're not allies. They're coalition partners. And I think they have to step, if they want NATO to continue, and I mean to convince the American people that it's worthwhile continuing, the elites of Europe have got to step up and say, okay, we're going to put real money into the situation. We're going to have more than 2 combat divisions. And this is more than the Brits. The British have been extraordinary, right? And although your military is very small to what it used to be, quality-wise, it's unparalleled. But it's small because you haven't invested in defense. But the rest of the people have just let the thing go.
Well, it's ironic because many in Europe, and particularly in Britain, feel that Britain's been a kind of vassal state to the United States for the last 70 years. And the fact you've had such a military presence on the continent and in Britain perhaps implies that.
Well, I've said for years, you don't want to be vassal states. The way you're not a vassal state is start to pay for your own defense and be a little bit independent. The United States, we don't want you, the populist nationalist movement, the last thing we want is the British or the Europeans to be vassal states. We're the big believers in the Judeo-Christian West in hanging together, right? But we don't want you as vassal states. Right now, I said the very first day I showed up at the White House and started looking through all the analysis, and I had for years, but then when I had the real classified, document, you're a protectorate. You're a protectorate just like Saudi Arabia in the Gulf. That's not your heritage. It doesn't help us, you being a protectorate, because what you have is the elites together, the Atlantic Council, the Atlantic Magazine. Because remember, in our vast country, it's still essentially run from Boston to New York down to Washington, D.C., what we call the Acela, the train. That train corridor with the big Ivy League schools, all the big law firms, the big media, is still, I guess, it's still 20 or 25% of the American population. But it's the credential class that's all there. And it's very close. The globalists are very close to Europe. And it's one of the things I want to break away from. I keep saying we're a Pacific nation, that the pivot, the strategic heartland of America is actually the Pacific, the vast Pacific. So if you do Trump's plan, which is brilliant, Greenland, and then the Arctic, right? Maybe some partnership with Canada, all the way down to Panama Canal. And if you look at the vast Central Pacific, which people forget, the Eurasian landmass is massive as that is, Mackinder's whole geopolitical strategy of who controls the heartland of the Eurasian. The Pacific, that vast Central Pacific, is actually the size of the Eurasian landmass. And that's why Pete Hegseth went, the 3 island chains from Hawaii to then Guam to then Philippines, Taiwan, and Japan. Those 3 island chains protected by the United States, because most of them are either territories of the United States or in partnership with the United States as allies, naval allies. That vast Pacific is the buffer, is the protection of the United States. You do that naval strategy, and that's what I say. We get the bases in Greenland. Essentially, the Russian army is your problem. We'll be there, but if you guys want to get in a shootout, a gunfight with Russia, have at it, right? You know, we saw how Stalingrad and Kursk turned out. So have at it. And all the big talk, I went on Sky News a month ago, and the broadcaster was shocked because I was giving her some basics. I said, Kurstomer talks big, but you guys don't have the balance sheet. You don't have the budget to be, he's talking of putting 30,000 troops in Ukraine. That's all happy talk. That's all a guy trying to be Winston Churchill Jr. It's not going to happen. You have massive financial problems in England that have to be solved now. And it's got to be solved with him, or the IMF is going to step in. You're going to have a sovereign debt crisis. He's going to get turfed out, and Nigel Farage is going to be your next prime minister.
You talk about strategic islands in the Pacific. Now, one of those islands, as we both know, is the Chagos Islands. Now, we talked about this in our last interview. Britain is giving up sovereignty of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, a Chinese ally, and paying £50 billion.
I don't understand how the Brits fought for the Falklands, and I had just come off sea duty. It was in the Pentagon at the time. I don't see how you fight for the Falklands in the South Atlantic and you give away one of the greatest strategic assets in the world today. People should know this obscure island of Diego Garcia. And if you're a Pacific Fleet sailor, it's everything, because that's where you refuel, that's where you restore. It's basically a pier and a runway. It's not, it's essentially an atoll. It's only one notch up from the 5 uninhabited islands that we gave tariffs to yesterday because of the penguins. Diego Garcia is so important. It is actually the linchpin of the Indo-Pacific strategy. And let me be blunt. With 2 carrier battle groups in the Red Sea, your only alternative is taking them around South Africa, which is not, if they come from the Atlantic Fleet, but if you're a Pacific Fleet, you've got to go back through the Straits of Malacca. Somehow somebody's got to refuel or restore at Diego Garcia. Now, I have been adamant, and I really want to give a thanks to Nigel Farage, who has done a tremendous job of bringing up to the top of the pile here in the United States that people think about. My understanding is that giving it back to Mauritius, who's up to the neck with the Chinese Communist Party, there is a lease that's going to be done for 99 years. Now, we saw what happened last time with Hong Kong. I adamantly oppose that. I think that the United States, and they've come and talked about it. I think Lord Mandelson or Sir Keir, I think there's obviously been discussions with inside the United States, because Nigel brought this up as a big deal. So my understanding is that, don't worry, even if it's going to go back to the country of original ownership, there'll be a long-term lease. That will be helpful. I don't even like that, but I don't know all the details behind the scenes. But having been a sailor that's sailed in the waters of Diego Garcia and had ships in my squadron have to go port there and refuel and replenish, it's not I tell people, when you talk about the Pacific Ocean, you talk about the South Pacific, you talk about the Indian Ocean, you're talking about vast spaces of ocean that are so vast, in these tiny spots that are these atolls. And Diego Garcia has been essentially a military base for us since World War II.
It just seems odd, because Donald Trump could have vetoed the deal and he didn't, or it looks like he hasn't. And
I don't know if that's totally official, but I agree with you. That's why my understanding, because I've been pretty adamant about this, my understanding is that a situation has been laid out that you can give it back, but there's a long-term lease that you control it. I'm not excited about that. I agree with Nigel. People should know that I think that may be a bone of contention later. What the Chinese Communist Party has done is predatory capitalism. What One Belt, One Road was to basically lend vast amounts of money to these South Asian and Sub-Saharan African countries to build massive infrastructure projects. And what happened is that, as you can imagine, the projects took longer. Sometimes the quality wasn't there. Maybe the business model didn't work. Virtually all of them are upside down. And what the Chinese Communist Party does is kind of what the British East India Company did in advancing cash. If you can't pay it, hey, maybe we restructure the deal. And that deal always has more control. I mean, the Brits ran India for 100 years and made it the jewel in the crown, kind of doing the same thing. And so Mauritius and all these countries have a much deeper relationship with the Chinese Communist Party because they've actually taken cash. I adamantly oppose this because I think democracy is central. And to me, what I don't get about it, with the need to have two carrier battle groups to keep the Red Sea open, and prices will skyrocket in Europe if the Suez Canal has any type of closure, or that you don't have the ship volume that has to go around Africa. You'll have pretty dramatic price increases. So it's not like it's not important to the people of all of Europe, not just the United Kingdom. And it has gotten no play really in the media. It's gotten more play here. And that's just because Nigel's alerted certain people who are involved in national security here, and we've made it a big deal. But I agree with you. My understanding is that it has been signed off, but I haven't seen that sign off. And as you know, it ain't, and here it ain't over. It ain't over till it's over. So it's always open to a last minute change.
There are certainly conflicts within the Trump administration, and we know that you're on one side, the kind of MAGA nationalist side, and then you also
the maximalist too.
Then you also have,
on any policy, I want to go to the absolute maximal.
Right. But then you also have the Elon Musk and the tech bros and the globalists, as you would describe them. There's been this report in Politico recently that Elon Musk is going to leave the administration in the next few weeks. Have you defeated Elon Musk?
I think I'd say it a different way. I've been Elon's actually biggest supporter. I'm adamantly opposed to the oligarchs in Silicon Valley, the apartheid state of Facebook and Google and Twitter, all these 5 or 6 companies that dominate not just social media, but so much of commerce in the United States. And they're all, including Amazon, these are massive monopolies that control American life and can make or break smaller companies, or can make or break, media companies. I'm still banned for life on all those platforms. The War Room is the number 2 podcast for politics in the country, and back of the Obama guys at Pod Save America, roughly, if you average everything out. And besides being on Apple and iHeartRadio and on Real America's Voice streaming and all the streaming services they get us on, we're banned on every major platform. These guys have immense control, and they banned us because of our political speech, because of economic populism and nationalism. So I'm adamantly opposed to that, and what it leads to, which is techno-feudalism, and you see this in every aspect of your life, particularly in Great Britain today. I'm adamantly opposed to this. These companies must be broken up. The power must be taken to these individuals. They don't really support us, because outside of Elon, who started to come over a couple of years ago with Twitter, but really in the spring of 24 started to see the mathematics of the coalition we were pulling together, and basically had people's back and wrote a huge check to support, not commercials, but to support the ground game, which is the way that we won. The Doge effort, I'm the first person to go out and talk about the deconstruction administrative state of CPAC. What Doge has done, I think, is fantastic. I think it's raised the American peoples of waste, fraud, and abuse. Here's the issue. We spend about $6.5 or $7 trillion a year. Our tax base, so everything we bring in, is about $4.5. We have a $2 trillion deficit every year. Think about that. Every year, $2 trillion that has to be financed. It's now up to $37 trillion, and we're adding right now about $1 trillion every 100 days. The model is not close to being sustainable. The gross interest charges now on just our debt is $1.4 trillion. Ray Dalio, one of the most sophisticated hedge fund guys, just gave an interview to CNBC 2 weeks ago. He says, hey, I see sovereign debt crises potentially happening in Europe with these governments. He says, but I see a failed treasury auction. Don't think the United States is off the hook. I see a failed treasury auction here where you go to market and refinancing these tens of trillions of dollars you have to do of debt, where people don't want to buy it unless you really jack up the interest rate. We are coming to that point. And so what Elon attempted to do and is trying to do is find the fraud, which he says is, and he said it again yesterday, is $1 trillion of fraud out of the, if we can find that, I'd be his biggest supporter. I want to put some meat on that bone. I do know, given Wisconsin and given the fact it's only 130 days and his companies are getting hammered, and people should know, it's horrible what they're doing to his companies. I mean, Tesla, we have an open, violent revolutionary movement that singled this guy out and gone after his customers, who are all kind of, the super liberals and progressives on electric cars, because no MAGA will buy an electric car. It's kind of progressives that bought them and had these dealerships, and now they're getting firebombed, Molotov cocktails. People are scraping. You can't drive a Tesla into a parking lot of a restaurant, or somebody will attack it or attack you personally. It's horrible what's going on. So no, I don't look at his wins and defeats, or he's defeated. What I know is that they keep talking about fusionism. And what they talk about is the economic populists and economic nationalists fusing with the big tech bros to form a new political entity. And I say that's never going to happen. What will happen is we can be coalition partners, and maybe uneasy coalition partners, because we're going to agree on some things and not agree on the others. You saw in Wisconsin, a ton of Trump voters, those low prevention, did not turn out, right? That's one of the reasons we lost. And we lost.
And do you blame Elon Musk for that?
I blame a lot of things. Number one, the reality people have to, and I hammer on this every day because we're the tip of the spear of turning people out of our audience. Trump has reformed, Trump has remade the Republican Party. You're seeing this happen in Great Britain right now, where the Tories are actually being remade by a party called Reform on the outside. Some period of time, I think they would take it over, merge, or whatever, but the Reform voter is quite different than the Tory voter today. The Tory voter is more the credential class, like kind of the Democratic Party. The Reform voter is much more working class, or it's that middle class that really, remember, it's kind of MAGA, right? Those voters are lower propensity voters. Trump voters are lower propensity. What do I mean by that? If Trump's on the ticket and we get everybody jacked up in the rallies, they'll come out to vote for Trump. If Trumpism's on the ticket and maybe it's not a great candidate, it's harder. And that is the only way you get that is not through radio and TV. The only way you get to that is through going door to door. And that's what Wisconsin showed that. I also think Elon did make a mistake and made himself too central into the campaign. It can't be about yourself. It has to be about the cause. It has to be about the movement. Trump can make it about himself because Trump embodies all of it, right? All the rest of us are kind of servants to that, to the movement. And we have to make sure we're putting the movement first. I think the mistake there was, and I also think the mistake is when you go on stage and you have a packed audience, that doesn't mean it's filtered out to the hinterland. It doesn't mean it's filtered out for what turned out to be a Supreme Court vote. And people should know, we got our asses kicked. It was a big defeat. It was almost, I think, 8, 9, 10 points. And there was $100 million spent. They spent an incredible amount of money, but I think we actually outspent them in Wisconsin. So people can't whine about, oh, the Democrats outside. The Democrats outworked us. And they did something very smart. They Alinsky'd Elon, but he kind of played into it. They made him the focus point. At the end, Trump's name was not, it was barely mentioned. Trump was barely mentioned. So in politics, you got to make sure you can't do that. But I think it's a whole host of things that, now, I would hope before he leaves, two things have to happen. We start to have to identify real numbers, particularly on fraud. Because the American taxpayer is sitting there going, hey, I don't trust the government to do anything. Even if Trump's there, all these guys in the administrative state are stealing from me, et cetera. We have to identify the actual fraud. And then we have to prosecute people. One of the things I keep harping about is if it's all this fraud and we're now 3 months into this or 2.5 months into this, how can we haven't named anybody that's, if they're stealing hundreds of millions of dollars, name them, and hey, what'll have to happen, the authorities will have to stop from being the French Revolution and getting guillotined. They'll have to make sure these people have fair trials because the citizens are worked up about this, given the fact that they pay so much in taxes and we pay the hidden tax of inflation. So I hope that in the time he's here, and I believe he's still going to be here for a month or two before he goes back and takes over his businesses, and he'll obviously be a big part of this. I've never tried to run him out totally, because I understand he did write a big check. President Trump likes him quite a bit, takes his advice. He's done a good job. Doge has got to go on, but now we have to make Doge real. It has to, have to see the real numbers. Because for your audience, this is a crazy thing. Because of the way we finance things here, we actually had to approve a budget that is actually Trump's first year. It's Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi's budget. This is what we've approved. That budget also had a $2 trillion deficit in it, baked into it, that we agreed to. And all of the fraud that Elon Musk had found up to 3 weeks ago is actually, none of it got taken out because there's an up or down vote. You got to vote for all or none, or it doesn't pass. So even War Room, who's the most adamant deficit hawks, our audience said just to get things forward and to move it for President Trump, so we'll eat it now. However, we were promised impoundments. We were promised rescissions. We were promised that all this money in Doge has been found and we're not going to end up paying for it. We're going to pound it. You know, I'd love Russ vote like a brother, but I keep asking everyone, given the fact that they pay so much in taxes and we pay the hidden tax of inflation. So I hope that in the time he's here, and I believe he's still going to be here for a month or two before he goes back and takes over his businesses, and he'll obviously be a big part of this. I've never tried to run him out totally, because I understand he did write a big check. President Trump likes him quite a bit, takes his advice. Given the fact that they pay so much in taxes and we pay the hidden tax of inflation. So I hope that in the time he's here, and I believe he's still going to be here for a month or two before he goes back and takes over his businesses, and he'll obviously be a big part of this. I've never tried to run him out totally, because I understand he did write a big check. President Trump likes him quite a bit, takes his advice. He's done a good job. Doge has got to go on, but now we have to make Doge real. It has to, have to see the real numbers, because for your audience, this is a crazy thing. Because the way we finance things here, we actually had to approve a budget that is actually Trump's first year. It's Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi's budget. This is what we've approved. That budget also had a $2 trillion deficit in it baked into it that we agreed to. And all of the fraud that Elon Musk had found up to 3 weeks ago is actually, none of it got taken out because there's an up or down vote. You got to vote for all or none, or it doesn't pass. So even War Room, who's the most adamant deficit hawks, our audience said just to get things forward and to move it for President Trump, so we'll eat it now. However, we were promised impoundments. We were promised rescissions. We were promised that all this money in Doge has been found and we're not going to end up paying for it. We're going to pound it. You know, I'd love Russ vote like a brother, but I keep asking every day, where's our impoundments? And people should know right now in America, this fight between the judiciary and the presidency is between this battle between the executive branch and the judicial branch, where the judiciary is basically saying you're not chief executive because you really can't cut personnel and you can't cut spending, which he's tried with Doge or not with Doge. Number two, you're not really the commander in chief, because although as commander in chief, you send terrorist criminals on a plane to Central America or back to Venezuela. You can't do that. We have to know the manifest where they're given due process. So federal judges. And the last, his chief magistrate and chief law enforcement officer, they're freaked out that he walked over to the Justice Department to give a speech. They don't want any contact between the Justice Department and the president, and they certainly don't want the FBI talking to the president. That fight, the unitary executive theory, is the big theory that's driving the ideas have consequences, driving President Trump's administration right now in this judicial revolt that you're seeing. Kind of like in a smaller scale you're seeing in the United Kingdom.
Now, you promised in our last interview that a lot of people will be going to jail, or a lot of people will be going to prison. And it doesn't seem that there are any prosecutions of so-called corrupt Democrats or the fraud.
We're 65 days into this. You don't know what's going on behind the scenes. You don't know if grand juries have been impaneled. You don't know if investigations. And I also said, I don't want to target just like the Biden family or things like that, although I think we'll eventually get there. To me, the corruption, what happened at the Justice Department is tremendous. I have been told that there's progress being made and all that. I'm prepared to keep.
Like, share, and subscribe for the next show. Elon Musk has finally taken a bow. He's been fired or succumbed to pressure. Whatever you want to say it, he's on his way out of the White House. So that is coming up next. For you to get that, please like, share, just subscribe. That will be coming up next. But to get that, you gotta subscribe.